The steel door slides open at 3 a.m. Breakfast. A man in a white jumpsuit with black letters DR on his back doesn't move from his bunk. He's been in this 60-square-foot cell for 19 years. Outside his window, through bars and reinforced glass, he can see nothing but concrete and razor wire. He's one of 168 people living in what's been called one of America's 10 worst prisons. The Polunsky Unit, Texas death row. 22 hours a day in a cell the size of a parking space. No physical contact with another human being for weeks at a time. No work. No programs. Just waiting. Some have been waiting for over 2 decades. Right now, at this very moment, those 168 men and 7 women are locked inside cells scattered across Texas, each one counting down to an execution date that may or may not come. Some are innocent. Some are guilty. All of them exist in a legal and psychological purgatory, unlike anywhere else in America. Texas has executed more people than any other state since 1976. 597 executions. More than the next 6 states combined. But the numbers are changing. Something is shifting inside the machine. Real quick, what you just saw is only the beginning. If you want the full story about how America's most secure prison became a gang factory, subscribe and turn on notifications right now. Hit the like button so this reaches more people. These investigations take months to verify, and most channels won't touch them. Let's continue. Texas didn't always run the most active execution chamber in America, but after the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976, something changed. The state built a system. At its peak in the year 2000, Texas executed 40 people, 40 human beings in 12 months. That's more than 3 people every single month. The execution chamber at the Huntsville Unit became the busiest room of its kind in the Western world. Today, the numbers tell a different story. According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, there are currently 168 people on death row as of early 2026. That's the smallest death row population in Texas since 1985. The reasons are complex. Death sentences have plummeted. In 1999, Texas juries sentenced 48 people to death. By 2025, that number dropped to just 3. But the machine still runs. The Huntsville Unit still houses the execution chamber, a 9 by 12-foot room with mint green walls and a gurney. Every person sentenced to death in Texas since 1982 who has been executed has died in that room. The path to that room begins 60 miles east, in the small town of Livingston. Inside the Polunsky Unit, male death row inmates spend their years at Polunsky. Women, all 7 of them, are housed at the O'Daniel Unit near Gatesville. But the isolation is the same. The waiting is the same. According to multiple sources who have documented conditions inside Polunsky, inmates live in single cells measuring approximately 8 feet by 12 feet. The cell contains a steel bunk 30 inches wide with a thin plastic mattress, a stainless steel sink and toilet combination, and a small window that most inmates can only see through by standing on their rolled-up mattress. They are locked down 22 hours per day, sometimes 24. Recreation time, when it's offered, means being moved from one cage to another cage. Alone. No televisions in the cells. No phones. Visits are non-contact only, separated by thick plexiglass. No hugs. No handshakes. No touch. One inmate's wife described the visiting conditions in testimony to local media. Her husband tries not to talk about where he lives, because living there means existing in a space most people cannot comprehend. The psychological research is clear. Extended solitary confinement causes measurable harm to human cognition and mental health. Studies document attention and memory deficits, paranoia, depression, and increased rates of suicide. A 2023 lawsuit filed by 4 Texas death row inmates alleged that conditions at Polunsky violate constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. The lawsuit described moldy cells, insect infestations, inadequate recreation time, and the use of prolonged solitary confinement as a standard practice rather than a last resort. The lawsuit is still pending, but in 2024, something unexpected happened. Prison officials began a pilot program allowing a small group of death row inmates to participate in limited group recreation. About a dozen men were moved to a separate unit where they could spend time outside their cells together, without handcuffs, for the first time in decades. One of those men, when asked what it felt like, said it made him feel human again after all these years. But that program only includes a fraction of the death row population. The rest remain in isolation, waiting. The numbers reveal patterns that cannot be ignored. According to the Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, Black individuals comprise nearly 48% of the current death row population. Hispanic individuals make up approximately 27%. White individuals account for about 23%. Compare that to Texas's overall population. Black residents make up about 12% of the state. Hispanic residents comprise about 40%. White residents account for roughly 40%. The disparity is stark. While Black Texans represent 1 in 8 residents, they represent nearly 1 in 2 death row inmates. The average age when inmates arrived on death row was 31 years old. The average current age is 50. Some have been there since their 20s. Now they're in their 50s, 60s, some older. Harris County, which includes Houston, has sent more people to death row than any other county in Texas. In fact, Harris County alone accounts for more than 1/3 of everyone currently on Texas death row. The county has carried out 136 executions since 1982. That's more executions than any U.S. state except Texas itself. Tarrant County made history in 2024. For the first time since 2014, a single Texas county sentenced more than 1 person to death in a year. Tarrant juries handed down 3 new death sentences in 2024, 3 people in 1 county in 1 year. In that same year, only 3 other Texas counties combined sent 3 more people to death row. The crimes that lead to death row are capital murders. In Texas, that means murders considered particularly heinous. The murder of a child under 15, murder committed during another felony, like robbery or sexual assault, murder of a police officer or first responder, murder for hire, multiple murders. But getting a death sentence requires more than a capital murder conviction. Texas law requires prosecutors to prove future dangerousness. The jury must believe the defendant will commit violent criminal acts in the future and poses a continuing threat to society. This standard is subjective. Prosecutors often point to prior convictions, behavior in jail, or find witnesses to testify about the defendant's violent nature. Sometimes the crime itself is so shocking that prosecutors argue it demonstrates deep violent pathology. The system isn't perfect. Since 1973, more than 18 people who were convicted and sentenced to death in Texas have been exonerated. 18 people who were scheduled to die were later found to be innocent. DNA evidence, false testimony, misconduct, new evidence. There's strong evidence that Texas has executed innocent people. Names like Carlos De Luna, Ruben Cantu, Cameron Todd Willingham. People who maintained their innocence until the moment they were strapped to the gurney. The most prominent case right now is Robert Roberson. He's been on death row for more than 2 decades for the death of his 2-year-old daughter in 2002. Prosecutors argued he killed her through violent shaking, based on what was then called shaken baby syndrome. But the science has changed. Medical experts now say the symptoms once thought to prove violent shaking can actually be caused by pneumonia, infections, accidental falls, and other medical conditions. At least 40 people convicted based on shaken baby syndrome allegations have been exonerated since 1992. Roberson's case gained national attention. A bipartisan group of 86 Texas state legislators spoke in support of reviewing his case. The lead detective who originally arrested Roberson now believes he's innocent. Best-selling author John Grisham is writing a book about the case. Roberson was scheduled for execution in October 2024, hours before he was supposed to die. A dramatic legal intervention stopped it. He's received stays of execution 3 times. His case has been sent back to lower courts for review. He's still on death row, still waiting. The routine at Polunsky Unit is designed around control and containment. According to documented accounts from inmates and their advocates, the day begins around 3 a.m. when breakfast arrives through the food slot in each cell door. 3 small pancakes, no syrup with calories, a piece of fruit if they're lucky. Lunch arrives around 10:30 a.m. Dinner at 4:30 p.m. During lockdown periods, which happen multiple times per year, inmates receive what they call sack lunches. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. According to nutritional analysis conducted by advocates, the total daily caloric intake during lockdowns averages around 1,400 calories. For adult men, some over 6 feet tall, medical guidelines suggest men of that height and activity level need closer to 2,200 calories minimum. Many inmates without outside financial support go hungry. Those with commissary access buy sugary snacks to supplement the inadequate meals. But not everyone can afford commissary. Recreation time, when it happens, follows a strict protocol. According to accounts from corrections officers and inmates, every time a death row prisoner leaves his cell, he must back up to the door, drop to his knees, extend his hands backward through the narrow slot to be handcuffed. Then he stands, turns around, and waits for the door to open. The process is particularly difficult for older inmates with arthritis. Some have been doing this routine for over 20 years. Recreation itself often means being moved from one solitary space to another. An outdoor cage, approximately 8 feet by 12 feet. Chain link walls. Concrete floor. A view of the sky through a metal grill. 1 hour. Alone. Some inmates, especially those struggling with depression and mental illness, refuse recreation entirely. They stay in their cells 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They only leave for mandatory showers, which happen 2 or 3 times per week. One death row inmate who has been profiled by media and advocates described his cell's ventilation problems. When the air circulation system fails, which happens regularly, mold and mildew grow on the walls. He cleans his walls up to 4 times a day to prevent the problem from getting worse. The same inmate described another prisoner with severe mental illness whose cell was found covered in mold and filth because he was incapable of maintaining basic hygiene due to his condition. Texas holds approximately a quarter of its death row inmates who have been diagnosed with either a serious mental illness or intellectual disability in these same conditions. 22 to 24 hours per day in solitary confinement. Mental health services at Polunsky include approximately 52 contracted employees for medical and mental health services. For a unit that houses not only death row, but also other high-security prisoners, staff members include 338 security personnel and 12 education employees. Visits are rare for many death row inmates. The visiting area uses non-contact booths. Thick plexiglass separates inmates from their visitors. They communicate through phones. No physical contact. Conversations can be monitored and recorded, despite attorney-client privilege concerns. Some inmates haven't had a visitor in years. Family members live hundreds of miles away and can't afford the trip. Some families stop visiting entirely. The distance, the cost, the emotional toll of seeing someone you love locked in a cage. A few death row inmates, starting in late 2022, gained access to tablets that allow monitored email and phone calls. But these devices cost money. Every message costs money. Every call costs money. Inmates who don't have outside financial support can't afford them. The isolation breaks people. According to psychiatric research cited in the 2023 lawsuit, prolonged solitary confinement causes lasting psychological damage. Some inmates waive their appeals. They choose execution over spending more years alone in a concrete box. One death row inmate who later received a stay of execution wrote about his experience being prepared to die. He described how prison officials brought him special meals, played his favorite music on the prison radio station, let him make phone calls. But he realized that none of it mattered. In the execution chamber, he would be alone, even if every person he loved could have been there holding him. Death was a journey he would make by himself. That particular inmate returned to death row after his stay. He said his hands stopped shaking after 2 days. His sleep returned to normal after 3 days. But the experience of nearly dying changed him completely. Most don't get stays. Most make that final trip to Huntsville and don't come back. When an execution date is set, the countdown begins. Inmates scheduled for execution remain at Polunsky Unit until the day of their death. They're transported to Huntsville the afternoon of their execution. The drive is about 60 miles, roughly 1 hour. The execution chamber at the Huntsville unit has been in operation since Texas reinstated the death penalty in 1976. Before that, Texas used the electric chair from 1924 to 1964. 362 people were electrocuted in Old Sparky, which is now on display at the Texas Prison Museum. Between 1819 and 1923, Texas used hanging, with executions carried out in the county where the trial took place. During the Civil War, 3 Confederate deserters and 1 man convicted of attempted rape were executed by firing squad. Since adopting lethal injection in 1982, Texas has executed 597 people. That's as of late January 2026, making it the state with the most executions by far. The next highest is Oklahoma, with 124 executions in the same period. The current execution protocol uses a single drug, pentobarbital, a barbiturate that, in high doses, causes death by shutting down the respiratory system. Texas abandoned the 3-drug protocol used by most states after pharmaceutical companies refused to supply the drugs for executions. According to prison protocol, executions must occur after 6 p.m. Central Time. The condemned inmate is brought to a holding cell about 30 feet from the execution chamber. They wait there until the appointed time. In 2011, Texas ended the practice of last meal requests. The explanation given was that the privilege had been repeatedly abused by inmates who requested elaborate meals and then didn't eat them. Since then, inmates receive the same meal as everyone else in the unit that day. Before execution, inmates are allowed to make final statements. They're not required to, but most do. Some apologize. Some maintain innocence. Some remain silent. The statements are recorded and made public. There are 2 witness rooms adjacent to the execution chamber. One is for family and friends of the crime victim. The other is for family and friends of the condemned. Both groups watch through windows as the execution is carried out. The actual process takes about 10 minutes from the time the inmate is strapped to the gurney until the warden announces the time of death. A doctor examines the body and pronounces death. The witnesses leave. The body is removed. The execution rate has declined dramatically from its peak in 2000. In 2024, Texas executed 5 people. In 2025, the state executed 5 more. That's the lowest rate since the early 1990s. But people are still being sentenced to death. In 2024, 6 people received death sentences in Texas, 3 from Tarrant County alone. In 2025, 3 more people were sentenced to die. Several execution dates are already scheduled for 2026. The legal appeals will continue. Some will receive stays. Some won't. The average time spent on death row before execution is now approaching 2 decades. That's partially due to mandatory appeals, but also because of the complexity of modern capital litigation. DNA evidence, mental health evaluations, challenges to forensic evidence. Some cases drag on for 25, even 30 years. The longest-serving death row inmates at Polunsky have been there since the 1980s. They were young men when they arrived. Now they're elderly. A few death row sentences get overturned entirely. In 2024, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the conviction of Andrew Rourke, who had been sentenced to death based on shaken baby syndrome evidence. The same evidence used to convict Robert Roberson. That ruling gave Roberson's attorneys hope. They argued the same science that exonerated Rourke should apply to their client. The appeals court agreed to send Roberson's case back to lower courts for review. But most death row inmates don't get overturned convictions. Most spend years, sometimes decades, waiting for an execution date that eventually comes. Something is changing in Texas. The state that leads the nation in executions is executing fewer people every year. Death sentences have dropped to their lowest level in decades. The death row population is shrinking, but the reasons are complicated. Some counties still aggressively pursue death sentences. Harris County and Tarrant County together account for the majority of new death sentences in recent years. Other counties have essentially stopped seeking the death penalty entirely. District attorneys have enormous discretion in capital cases. Some DA's offices have formal policies limiting death penalty prosecution. Others pursue it whenever legally possible. Geography determines who lives and who dies as much as the crime itself. The cost is another factor. According to reporting from Houston and El Paso, individual death penalty cases can cost counties millions of dollars. One Harris County case cost taxpayers $1.8 million. The El Paso Walmart shooting case cost $6 million, even though it never went to trial. Small counties can't afford those expenses. Meanwhile, life without parole has become a more acceptable alternative. Juries that might have chosen death in the 1990s now choose life sentences. Public support for the death penalty has softened. Concerns about executing innocent people have grown. Nationally, the death penalty is becoming increasingly rare. 23 states have abolished it entirely. 4 more have governor-imposed moratoriums. Only 27 states, the federal government, and the U.S. military maintain active death penalty systems. In 2024, only a handful of states carried out executions: Texas, Alabama, Oklahoma, Missouri, and a few others. Most death penalty states go years between executions. Globally, the United States is an outlier. According to Amnesty International, only 15 countries performed executions in 2024. The countries with the highest numbers were China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Yemen. The United States ranked 7th. Most democratic nations have abolished capital punishment entirely. Inside Polunsky Unit, the changes are incremental. The pilot program, allowing limited group recreation for some death row inmates, represents a significant shift after 26 years of total isolation. But it's only available to a small number of carefully selected inmates. The vast majority remain in solitary confinement. The 2023 lawsuit challenging conditions on death row continues through the courts. The plaintiffs argue that prolonged solitary confinement violates the Eighth Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. The state argues that death row inmates' crimes justify the restrictive conditions. Legal experts watch the case closely. If the courts rule in favor of the inmates, it could force significant changes to how Texas houses people sentenced to death. Robert Roberson's case continues to draw attention to questions about the reliability of forensic evidence in death penalty cases. His attorneys, supported by legislators and advocates, argue that outdated science led to his wrongful conviction. Prosecutors maintain he's guilty and should be executed. The case raises fundamental questions. What happens when the science changes after someone is sentenced to die? Should courts allow new evidence, even decades after conviction? How certain must we be before taking a human life? Texas answered some of these questions by passing a junk science law in 2013. The law allows inmates to challenge convictions based on advances in forensic science that weren't available at trial, but courts have been reluctant to apply it broadly. Roberson's attorneys argue he should be exactly the kind of case the law was designed to address. The state disagrees. As of early 2026, 168 men and 7 women remain on Texas death row. Some have been there for over 30 years. Some arrived recently. They come from dozens of Texas counties. They committed different crimes. They have different legal claims. But they share the same reality. Living in a concrete cell, mostly alone, waiting to see if the state will eventually kill them. Every name on the death row list represents multiple lives destroyed. The victim, the victim's family, the condemned inmate, the inmate's family, communities torn apart by violence, and then by years of legal battles. The death penalty doesn't heal those wounds. It doesn't bring anyone back. At best, it offers a sense of closure to some victims' families. At worst, it executes innocent people, wastes taxpayer money, and fails to deter violent crime. Texas will likely continue to have death row for the foreseeable future. Public support remains higher in Texas than in most states, but the trajectory is clear. Fewer death sentences, fewer executions, growing scrutiny of forensic evidence, longer times between sentencing and execution. The question isn't whether Texas will eventually abolish the death penalty. The question is what happens to the 175 people currently on death row before that day comes. Some will be executed. Some will die of natural causes. Some will have their sentences overturned. Some will spend the rest of their lives in that 60-square-foot cell. Right now, somewhere in Polunsky Unit, a man is waking up for his 7,000th consecutive day in solitary confinement. Another is receiving word that his final appeal has been denied. Another is meeting his lawyer for the first time in months, through plexiglass, talking about evidence that might save his life. The machine keeps running, slower than before, but still running.